Welcome, everyone. My name is Felipe. I am so happy to have the honor to introduce our Global Read webinar series for today. We have the honor of hosting Andy Spragg, the author of The Magic of Noticing, and the conversation will be moderated by one of our charter friends, Orla O'Sullivan. Thank you both so much for being here, for taking the time to spend some time with us sharing about the book of The Magic of Noticing and what that means, what that entails, and how that is related to compassion. And for everybody watching, this is being recorded and we'll be posting on our YouTube channel later on. We're currently live on Facebook as well, so that we can ask questions there. And at the end, I'll come in again to give some more announcements. But for now, Orla, Andy, the floor is yours.
Lovely. Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Felipe, and a warm welcome to all of us who are coming together live in this moment on various platforms, and to those who will join us later on the recording. You're very warmly welcome. My name is Orla O'Sullivan, and I have had the joy of being connected with the Charter for Compassion for some years, helping to create the Charter Circle, so a community circle where we come together to take good care of our hearts. And I am delighted to be here today with Andy Spragg, who has been exploring Buddhism and Tai Chi for many years. And we'll have the joy today of hearing some of Andy's book, The Magic of Noticing. So Andy, before we dive into the book, I wondered if you might share a little bit about your background and what led you or what inspired you to write this book.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've been a practicing Buddhist for over 30 years now. It dates back to, well, I had a tumor in my hip joint when I was quite young, and it was a big old shock. And I started reaching out different types of spirituality, and I came across Buddhism. And I've been practicing ever since. And oh gosh, over the last 20 years at least, I've been writing my own little articles. And I started to think about pulling them all together into a book. And this came about 3 years ago, actually. I've got to say, it was a lockdown project. I had plenty of time then. So I thought, right, I'm going to pull it together. And it was a challenge because, my articles had been written as individual articles. So to bring something together that scanned as a book was quite challenging, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Why did I write it? Well, I think what I've learned over my time practicing is a lot of writing in Buddhism. It can come across quite esoteric and rather impenetrable. So I wanted to write something that was accessible to kind of anyone, really. I wanted to show that actually Buddhism is quite grounded in its thinking. I'm quite a grounded person. I love science, and so I wanted to bring some of that in, and I wanted it to be accessible for spiritual interest, all religions, all walks of life, really. So that was the aim. So hopefully I've managed to accomplish that. I think I I also wanted to make sure it's not a self-help book. There's lots of self-help books out there. I didn't want to do that, even though the practice of Buddhism can, of course, help us all. Um, and then I thought, right, target audience. Who are my target audience? And I came up with my mum, who is she's actually traditionally Christian and quite cynical about Buddhism. So she was a good target. And my brother, he's an accountant, a very accomplished accountant, a very busy man, high stress environment, practical, intelligent man, and can also be quite cynical about spiritual aspects. So I thought there's two people. If I can get it through to them, I can get it through to anybody.
Brilliant. So
Well,
where would you like to start?
the book is split into two main sections. It's my own personal musings from over the years, and then the more sort of, I guess you'd call it, formal Buddhist teachings. And I'm going to start with my own personal musings. So I'm going to pick up some areas of the book and just read them through to you, and then we'll see what questions you have on them. So the first one actually is from chapter 4, and it's "Why is Buddhism all about mind?" So here we go. In the book, I say, this is really our starting point. You soon discover that Buddhism is all about mind. You may hear of rituals, religious devotions, incense, statues, and many other aspects that go into the melting pot of Buddhism. But sitting below it all, driving it all, is this self-study of the mind. In order to understand why, we take ourselves back to the Buddha and what he'd experienced in the forests during his 7 years as a practicing ascetic. The essence of the ascetic's practice was actually to drive out the soul so that we could witness it. The Buddha realized that he was finding this was fundamentally wrong. He even deliberately turned his back on the practice centered on the soul, the very thing the ascetic practice was trying to work on. He didn't deny it. He just decided to investigate the idea with an open mind, essentially to see if he could find a soul through meditation. He went back to what he was trying to investigate in the first place. What is the purpose of life? If we all get sick, we get old, and we die. He realized that obviously we can't escape these three factors, but we can escape suffering itself. And his answer to that was remarkably simple. We don't suffer because of the things that happen to us. We suffer because of our reaction to the things that happen to us. This startlingly simple idea is the root of everything we practice in Buddhism. So yes, academically, it's actually pretty easy to get our minds around that idea, but very difficult in practice because we're human beings. That's what makes it difficult. Of course, the thing that contributes to mind, that stirs the mind up, inhibits a settled meditation, thoughts themselves. And the whole premise of the book, clues in the title actually, is noticing, to actually notice the thoughts as they arise in the mind, to learn to deal with them. We have to notice these thoughts being born in the mind so that we can see them. Okay, so that was kind of the opening premise, if you like, of the book.
And I'm curious, going back to your mum, who you had mentioned as one of the inspirations for, if your words could reach her, then you're 50% of the way to reaching everyone. Yeah, that as someone who was raised Christian, what was her response to the book? Did she see the wisdom, whether or not it was Buddhist? I'm curious as to how that resonated with her heart.
She's found it helpful. I mean, one of her observations is, well, there's no difference. It's because Buddhism emphasizes compassion, and so does the Christian faith. I mean, I have to say she's read it twice now, so that's a good sign.
I praise.
One of her concerns early on, and she kept asking, it was, have you lost your faith? And that was a real concern for her. Have you lost your faith? I run retreats, and I get Anglican priests coming on my retreats, and I said to her, look, they say to me that if there's any place that they can really reach out and listen to the words of God, it's deep in meditation. So although I don't necessarily now place my faith in some external entity, a God, I don't deny the existence of God. That was very interesting discussions with her.
I love that. And I love the spaciousness that brings. I've practiced with Thich Nhat Hanh and the Plum Village tradition for some years, and often there would be a question on retreat about, I am a Christian or I am Muslim or I am Jewish, and is this for me? And his answer was always like, it'll make you better Christian, make you better Muslim. It's like, if you can sit and deliberately nourish your heart and the quality of your mind and take engaged action based on your wisdom and the collective wisdom, that's only a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So we move on to how we deal with these thoughts, how we work with them, because that is a really tricky bit, actually. So still in chapter 4, we have book extract, dealing with thoughts. Many people, when they come to meditation, express a concern that they can't shut up their minds. And this is where our challenge is, because we seem to have a tendency to believe that our thoughts are somehow me, or that if we don't pay attention to our thoughts, we somehow can't function. Anyone who meditates soon discovers that this isn't the case. Life happens whether or not we pay attention to our thoughts. We also start to understand how our minds sometimes even tell us lies. In this way, through this noticing, our thoughts lose their power over us. Through meditation, we seek to take away the power of thought and see behind it. So here's another analogy for you which can help. We can view the mind like layers of the sea. The top layer is where the large thoughts roll through, like large waves, and these we feel have a great deal of power over us. This is a noisy layer. The waves are powerful, and I like to call these thoughts, these big waves, juggernaut thoughts. When they occur, they take us over. They may be important, but we listen to them and we hear, I wonder what's for dinner tonight. Often they come in the form of internal dialogue in the mind, and the mind chats to itself. It justifies, it argues, it judges, and it explains. The next layer below this is the foam. Here we have tiny little thoughtlets forming all the time, snippets of conversations, little bits of music, a memory of a face. Often in this layer, the mental objects arise as images or sound, so they are more akin to sensory experiences. This layer is essentially our entry point into the subconscious. Then below this, we have pure mind. With practice, we can reach this layer. But in order to reach it, we have to accept that the top two layers exist and are not going to go away. If we don't accept the nature of mind, we'll never reach that quiet, still place, because the mind won't quieten. The waves on top of the ocean are there whether we like them or not. Once we start to accept they're there, we can let them go, ignore them, if you like. The mind is not a calm, logical place. It's complex and it's chaotic. We often call it monkey mind, leaping from branch to branch in a random fashion. This is exactly the behavior of mind. If you strive to get your mind to stop doing this, you'll fail. That's what minds do. The aim of meditation is to develop an accepting approach to mind, to let it do its thing while you focus awareness on the meditation subject. Slowly the mind will respond, sink and settle, but you can't make it do that. Actually, we shouldn't try to lose that chaotic nature of mind. It's out of this chaos that our wonderful individuality and our incredible creativity come from. We should embrace its chaotic nature. This is just the way in.
Thank you so much, Andy. I love that description of the layers in the ocean. And I find for me that felt sense that thoughts are real but not necessarily true gives me a lot of space to work with the thoughts. So I'm curious, when you were, and I know it's not a self-help book, So, um, but what is a way into helping to take care of the chaotic nature of our mind? So, is there a quality that you draw on? Is there a strength? Is there a kind of part of your personality that helps you to take care of this monkey mind?
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the start, I am quite scientific, so I'm fascinated by the nature of thought. And often what I seek to do is try to identify what a thought is like as it flows through the mind. And not the story within the thought, but what is a thought like? What's my experience of that? So you can develop a gentle watching, a gentle vigilance for the moment a thought appears in the mind. And you can play games with thoughts. So you can ask them, how does a thought appear? Does, does it trickle down from the top of the head? Does it run from left to right or right to left? Or does it bubble up from the bottom? Or does it just appear in the middle? Yeah, how does that happen? And they're strange things, thoughts. It's almost like they don't want to be witnessed being born. Um, because when you play those games, I mean, people can try this after the session. Just close your eyes and try and spot a thought being born in the mind. They just fade into the background again. The in meditation and often in life, the thoughts that kind of carry us away are the ones we don't notice being born in the mind. And they latch a hold of us, we open them up, and before we know it, we're off on the story. Um, so that's one good way. I mean, I've been teaching for sort of getting on 20 years now, and no word of a lie, every single person I've ever taught has said to me, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this because my mind is very special. It's very noisy. I'm
You're
very,
obviously a laid back person, Andy, but I know, I get the same thing. It's like, I'm a very busy person. I think a lot of thoughts. I can't do it.
I mean, the truth is none of us are special and all of us are special. We're all very similar in that sense. So it's quite fun to have that conversation.
Absolutely. And I do think that moment of like trying to turn towards your thoughts, and then often I'll hear people say, I I'm not having any thoughts. And I'm like, that is a thought that you're not having any thoughts. It's fascinating to see how our mind responds to being observed.
And
Mm.
also, some people find it quite shocking. I was working with a lady a couple of years ago, and she'd lost her husband actually, and her husband had been very interested in Buddhism. And after he passed away, she thought, well, I better learn about all this. So she came to me for Buddhist mentoring, and in one session, she she suddenly opened her eyes and she said she was really fearful. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Well, I suddenly had a moment there where there were no thoughts, and it's the first time I've experienced it. It was a big old shock." Um, there's another game you can play that actually was born out of my a word of wisdom from my father, which was just beautiful. And it dates back to when I was about 14 years old, and we were on a family holiday in Wales, staying in a caravan, and it was throwing it down with rain. It rains a lot in Wales, and my mum said, "Let's go for a family walk in the hills." Well, I was a grumpy 14-year-old at the time. The last thing I wanted to do was put on one of those day-glow yellow Pacamacs and go walking in the hills. And my father said to me, "Don't worry, son, it's dry between the raindrops," which at the time really wound me up, as you can imagine. But
Imagine.
all these years later, it got me thinking, hang on, the mind is not completely full of thoughts. There is space between them. What is that like? What is your experience of mind when you go into the space between the thoughts? What do you find what is the nature of mind? How big is it? Can you find the edges? So again, it's another lovely little mind game that can help you actually get to that place of pure experience of mind, rather than latching into the stories of thoughts.
Oh, I love that. What beautiful continuation of wisdom as well from your dad. I work a lot with people who are living in pain, and when we practice for a while, often their experience is that there is space between, the pulses of pain or the manifestation of pain, that somehow there's more space than what felt simply like a siren, just, continuous noise. So interesting how we can discover a vast space in our being.
I also encourage my students to really look into those little moments in a meditation session where actually they do experience moments of no thought. At the end of a session, we tend to focus on all the times the mind wandered off. But I said, actually, if you celebrate those moments where the mind didn't wander, even if it's only 1 or 2 seconds, by doing that, you're encouraging yourself to practice more. Whereas if we focus on those swathes of time where the mind wandered, we're discouraging ourselves. And
We
that helps.
are. That's our negativity bias in action.
Yeah. And
Mm.
those when no thought arises, the Buddha taught us that there are 3 roots of suffering: our desires and cravings, our aversions, and human delusion, literally the overlay of all of our biases, opinions, and prejudices. We all have them. And all those 3 are delivered by thought. So in those tiny little moments where there isn't thought, there is no desire, there is no aversion, there is no delusion. That's Buddha nature right there. It's beautiful. So hone in on that and experience it and see what it's like, and it encourages you to deliver more into your practice. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So this conversation could lead us in many places, but I'm going to bring us back to the book. So can you share a little bit more with us?
Yeah, I'm going to go next into a subject called the Vedanas, which for me, through my practice has been a real fantastic area to really explore, essentially a gateway into deep mindfulness in our lives. Vedanas is a Buddhist word, and often these Buddhist words, you need a book to translate them. It's often translated as feelings, but that really doesn't do it justice, actually. We all have Vedanas in us, and the best way to illustrate it is an example. Now, I created this example. It's an invention of my mind, but it might ring bells with people. So this is in chapter 6, the Vedanas, an example. At the age of 7, a child at primary school is standing in the playground with the other children. It's a warm summer's day, and this child suffers with hay fever. It makes him wheezy and makes his eyes sting. The other children don't understand it, as they don't suffer with hay fever. Sports day is coming up, and the children are being selected into their teams. Now, this poor boy is never keen on sport and never very practiced, because most of the sports practice happens in the summer when the weather's nice, outside in the pollen-rich playing fields. The teacher picks the boy for one of the teams, the red team. It's very important. The teammates who've already been selected let out an audible groan. Kids can be horrible. And unfortunately, the teacher doesn't correct their behavior. There's a great deal going on in this picture, and a lot of this experience could now become embedded. The child will feel very powerful emotions which result in tension in the heart and the gut. This is establishing the Vedanas. This is how the Vedanas get embedded in us. Strong sensory experience gets associated with strong emotional response. And this essentially gets recorded in the body. From this point forward, Associations will be made with this sense experience, all the sense experiences that were happening at the time. The warmth of the summer's day, the smells, figures in authority, the color red. The Vedanas are established instantaneously, so certain sense experiences will be more prevalent and create a stronger trigger for the Vedanas. Now, of course, we can't protect ourselves or our children from this kind of experience. This is part of life. Tough things happen. But as individuals, we can start to recognize the Vedanas in ourselves and do something about them. In the case of this little boy, let's say the color red and the authority figure are embedded. In the future, in situations where one or both of these arise in this person's life, there'll be a tightening in the gut and the heart. This will be unconscious, but it will happen, and it will influence the way the boy acts in the situation, causing a potential for fear or anger, which then result in action. If unnoticed, the Vedanas can get even more deeply ingrained, as this may result in further and more extreme emotional misfortune, which again results in further stress, tension, and tightening in the heart. This might be slight and gentle, but it does deepen. Each episode associated with these sensory experiences deepens the experience. In the worst case, the man who grows up out of the boy develops a compulsive mistrust of authority figures, ends up with a compulsive disorder associated with the color red, which could influence the rest of his life. A very tough mental process is now being established here, and it will be a hard one to break. Not all Vedanas are bad. For me, a certain tick of a clock produces a lovely feeling of safety and calm. And this comes from my childhood, when I slept in a room in my grandmother's house. My grandparents were wonderful, and I always felt very safe and very secure with them. So how do we deal with the Vedanas? Firstly, we shouldn't see them as bad or evil. This is another thing in our makeup that evolution has had a hand in building. So the way to approach them is to see their influence as an interesting thing to study in our lives. As always, reflected in the title of this book, the magic is in the noticing. This is all we have to do. We notice how sense objects produce an instantaneous tightening in our heart and our gut. Some of these will be surprising, and we may not even remember the reason behind them. In our example, the older man may have absolutely no recollection why he has a fear of the color red. But we notice and we focus on the physical sensation. We mentally soften into it. We apply a gentleness of spirit to it, easing out the tension, replacing it with calmness. We can breathe into it, develop a habit of paying attention all the time. We notice this tightening arise. Have you ever had a feeling that something awful has happened? It manifests as a superstitious dread that someone close has maybe suffered in some way. Chances are that's the Vedanas at play. A sense trigger that's buried deep has triggered the physical tightening. There's no need to notice or know the history of the triggered sense itself, although we can if it helps. All we need to do is notice the physical tightening and learn how to soften and relax into it. The Vedanas.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I'm reminded of being at a neuroscience conference some years back, and the phrase one session was the neurons that wire together, that fire together, wire together. So that if like three different neurons and one is red and one is meanness and one is something, they all get tangled up. So it's almost like having one switch to turn on or turn off. And a part of our practice is about untangling those different wires that go into that switch.
I think what makes it so difficult and why meditation practice is so important in this and stepping away from those thoughts is that when the Vedanas fire up, the mind wants to justify why it's feeling like it is.
Of course.
And it looks around itself and it latches onto things that offer some form of explanation. In the case of that superstitious dread, we have this feeling in our bodies and we think, one of my friends or family are in trouble. So we pick up the phone and we start ringing them all. You ring enough people, you'll find someone who's in trouble. And then we go, that's it. I knew it. And that's how the Vedanas work. And unless we just start to work on that first sign that they've exposed themselves, that tightening in the gut, and we just work on that, soften into it. The body scan meditation helps us here because we develop a practice of noticing tension in the body, learning how to soften it, even in the heart and the gut. Yeah.
I'm reminded of years back, there was a mindfulness retreat in California, and Thich Nhat Hanh was leading it, and it was a time of wildfires. So there had been some fires that were ongoing. And so there were people sitting in the meditation hall, and there were helicopters going over. And a lot of the people were Vietnamese, so they had lived through the American War in Vietnam, and helicopters meant something very different. The sound of helicopters had a very different interpretation for our body. And yeah, Thich Nhat Hanh noticed the response to these sounds, and he actually brought it into their practice that afternoon. So they practiced on, that this helicopter sound, where did it emanate from, and what was it leading to? It was leading to this soothing of these flames that would protect homes, that would protect forests, that would protect so many living creatures, and that it was a very compassionate sound in that instance, to help them rework with bringing a sense, quality of ease and a soothing to their nervous system.
Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah.
People are complex and very simple things at the same time. And I love that your point about we may never know the cause of it. We might just know, I have a strong response to that. I'm noticing strong response in me. That's already more than enough. That's really good.
I mean, it could have got embedded when we were 4. We're just not going to remember. And we try and remember, and then the mind latches on something. We go, yes, that must be it.
Yeah.
But there's no need to do that.
Yeah, there's beautiful, well, it's very sad research, but useful research, where they took little mice, this is the sad bit, and they showed them a picture of a cherry blossom, and then they gave them an electric shock. And the mice did that, we call it playing dead in English, but it's not really playing dead, what's going on with them, but the mice kind of responded, that stress response, by zoning out. And they did it until they could just show the mice a cherry blossom and they would zone out and appear dead for some time. And then they stopped giving them electric shocks and they let the mice have babies. And the babies who had never received an electric shock were shown a cherry blossom and they played dead. And their babies, who were now 2 generations removed from ever having got an electric shock, were still responding in the same way. It's extraordinary what we carry in ourselves as things to be alert to or ways to survive.
Definitely. Yeah, we are complex, us people.
Yes. So speaking of people, one of the beautiful descriptions from your book that I really enjoyed was about people as landscapes, and I'm wondering if you might share that part with us.
Certainly. That's chapter 6 as well. People are landscapes. And it opens with a little verse, actually, that I came up with. A raindrop falls. Will it feed a river, a flower perhaps, a creature perhaps? A thought trickles through the mind. Will it feed fear, anger, or compassion? Karma is born. We are a landscape. A few years ago, now on Holy Isle, a Tibetan Buddhist island just off the Isle of Arran, Scotland, I was running a Tai Chi and meditation retreat, taking some time out to rest. There's a lovely hill in the middle of the island. One morning, I took a walk up it. The view from the top is gorgeous. I was standing on top and watching the rain sweep across the distant hills of Arran. You can see the highest mountain, Goat Fell, from there. It was looking very dark and moody across there that morning, although my hilltop was in sunlight. Watching the rain and the landscape from a distance like this, it made me realize that I was watching dependent arising in action. For the benefit of non-Buddhists reading this, dependent arising is the understanding that nothing exists in and of its own right. Everything is the result of some cause and effect. In fact, in Buddhism, each and every moment has this in its nature. Even we are the results of dependent arising. Each and every moment of our lives. There's no single thing called me, just a set of interdependent events, actions, and thoughts that create the perception of this thing called Andy Spragg. I realized that studying this landscape in front of me was a little like studying a person, just as complex, just as intangible. A single droplet of rain falls from the sky. Who can predict which way it'll go? It may land on hard ground, flow into other flows of water, and together form a stream, a river, and cut down into the landscape in a very obvious but slow manner. The droplet may land on soil or a plant, becoming absorbed as the plant sends its roots down. The plant may become part of this rich landscape, the roots subtly changing the soil below. Lichen may be nourished by the water and change the color of the stone it's growing on. An animal may drink from a pond the droplet has landed in. Who knows the way that animal may contribute to the landscape? I started to see all these things within the landscape, and the view before me was suddenly more complex and more beautiful, but also fragile. I suddenly felt the very nature of change in the landscape at a very deep level. It was at this point, while studying this gorgeous vista in front of me, I started to think about people and the similarities with these thoughts. When a person stands before me, I perceive what I believe is their character and what is displayed by their appearance and by the limited set of actions that I've witnessed. Just like with the landscape, I'm misled by my perceptions. I don't see the equivalent of the drop of water. The Buddha gave us this view of our minds, our thoughts, and how they build our character. The thought manifests as the word manifests as the deed develops into habit, and habit hardens into character. So watch the thought in its ways with care, and let it spring out of love, born out of a concern for all beings. As a Buddhist, I believe my body, yes, my body and my mind at this point in time is literally the composition of all my previous thoughts and actions. There are clearly external influences that happen. The Buddha describes how these influences affect us too. But here, the message is clear. Every single thought we have goes into our very makeup.
It's a very deep teaching. And I'd like to bring in a question that was asked in the chat, because I feel this might be a good a good moment just to draw in this reflection, and I'll read it out so no one needs to worry about reading small letters. So Mike Egan says, thanks Andy, it sounds like your book is a great read, and I love your multi-layered ocean analogy. Although my meditation practice isn't very regular, I have also done some meditation practice and training in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. I'm very taken with his teaching that all ideas are wrong ideas, and that life is essentially experiential and non-dual rather than conceptual in nature. How might this, or how does this teaching relate to your theme of noticing? Thanks from Mike in Drogheda in Ireland.
Thank you, Mike. That's a good one. You are delving deep there. So in Buddhism, we have this concept of the relative world and the absolute world. And actually, as humans, we live in both. Most of us humans live in the relative world. Let me describe it with an example. Imagine you walk into a room and there's a gold bar sitting on the table there. And you see that gold bar. And most of us humans in that relative world see the value. and maybe we start thinking about what we could do with that money, you know, that sort of thing. A dog walks into the room. The most it will probably do is sniff the gold bar, you know. And that's really what we're talking about here, the difference between the absolute and the relative. The absolute world is actually in that moment that the dog is in, and the relative world is the one we're in. As humans, we have to live in both. We have to. You know, lots of people talk about money as a bad and evil thing, but you pour money into a poor country, it can transform it. It can take away suffering. A bus is a human concept. It doesn't really exist. But if you step out in front of one, you discover how important that relative world actually is. And us humans, you know, the concept of this permanent self called Andy Spragg, in the relative world, I have to pay attention to that. It keeps me safe. I protect this perception of a permanent self. But in the absolute world, it doesn't exist. It's being reborn every moment by the thoughts I have and the things that are happening to me. So that's really what we're talking about here.
Beautiful. Thanks, Andy. And in terms of, I know we use different words to describe these sometimes. So sometimes they are called the historical dimension, in that you have a name and a social security number and you own your own shoes. And then the ultimate dimension, this this more eternal, unborn and indestructible sense of ourselves. I've heard Thich Nhat Hanh sometimes describe it as like that we're waves, and that we spend our life, you know, comparing ourselves to other waves, and you know, he's more beautiful or she's more clever, and we're all desperately trying to reach water, to become water. So that tends to be historical concerns versus, like, we can have a very deep realization of being water already.
Yeah, Charlotte Yoko Beck, in one of her books, she's a Zen nun. She writes a beautiful piece where she describes, imagine looking down on a great river and you can see whirlpools, eddies in the river. And, you know, some of them are fast and some of them are slow, some of them are big and some of them are small. And if you look at them, they last for a while as they flow down the river, and they almost have characters. If those whirlpools and eddies could develop sentience, self-awareness, they'd probably see themselves as separate from the river. But actually, the truth is, they're never separate from the river. Eventually, they lose their energy, but they've never been apart from the river in the first place. And that really nails the Buddhist view of a human life.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the challenges that we constantly strive for as a Buddhist is to break down that self-perceiving barrier between us and the universe. Yeah.
Years back, I went through a phase of looking at people the way I look at trees, because I realized I never judge trees, whether they're like, you know, really small and a bit you know, like if they've experienced drought, or if they live on the west of Ireland, they tend to, we call them bonsai trees. You know, they're facing into the Atlantic wind, and, you know, reaching 1 foot high is amazing. But if they were in a verdant valley, they'd be 90 feet high, no problem. Um, but I have completely different expectations of human beings without knowing all of the conditions that have helped them to, you know, be the event that's unfolding in the moment that I meet them. So yeah, there are different ways into helping to loosen the strictness of our notions, I think. Mm.
Yeah, we need to watch the time, obviously, but I'd like to dive into one last area actually that might help with all of this.
Please, yeah.
And this was from chapter 6. It's called Chaos the Teacher, and it really it illustrates the way us humans respond to the world around us. So here we go. The natural order of things is chaos. Possibly a controversial statement. We could discuss it at length. But let's take a look at nature in the raw. The woodland embodies chaos. When you look out on a woodland, the trees haven't grown in an ordered way. They're all unique and different in shape. and they've grown in very random fashion. The woodland floor is covered with thickets and brambles and fern. It's completely impenetrable to walk through. The birds are singing, their song is chaotic, but it's so beautiful for all of this chaos. This is the natural world, chaotic, without order and absolutely stunning. However, if we tune in, we can pick out patterns in the bird song. Similar sounds from the various species come through. The birds in their song have evolved this way, so they're able to identify mates, warn each other of danger, possibly even help find food that's relevant to their species. There are tracks through the forest that humans have made. Without these, as I say, the forest would be impenetrable. Chaos is the natural order of things, but all the species occupying that woodland without question, and to some extent, evolved to bring some form of order into their lives. Now, we humans have taken this to the furthest extent. Our ability to plan, design, see risks, bring order from all this chaos is phenomenal. The real illustration of this is, of course, found in our cities. The modern human city, complex set of interoperating processes, functions, rules, roles, incredible electronic and mechanical devices. Our manipulation of energy allows us to drive through, design and build the city, and all these things are intermeshed and cooperating with hugely complex systems of interdependence, all designed by humans. Nature invades the city, of course. Dust and dirt, soil, creatures of many types creep in, but we push them back out. In places within the city, we choose to groom nature to our design, to bring order to it, to bring in parks and gardens. These parks are places of beauty, but they are manipulated into that state by human applied energy. Take that energy away, the park quickly starts to revert back to its natural chaotic state. Just look at how much energy you have to apply to keep your garden looking nice. I don't intend to give you the impression I'm criticizing these human achievements. There are some who believe that everything man-made is bad. It's not me. I love our cities. My wife and I spent a day in Paris one spring, stunning to walk along the banks of the Seine in the sunshine and see the tended fruit trees in full blossom. Our parks are gorgeous. Creativity and design that's gone into them I find wonderful. But chaos is the natural order of things and with us always. Change tack a little. Mindfulness practice is a practice. In sitting, we learn to open up and see things as they are. Our relationship with chaos and nature is a key aspect of this. Living in a city, looking closely at the world around us, we perceive the chaos. Sitting in meditation, the first place we find chaos is in our own minds. The practice is just to notice this, perceive the nature of mind exactly as it is. In my early experiences of meditation, I was amazed how chaotic my mind was, and actually still is. Thoughts, emotions, memories, and desires all jumbled up, all tumbling over each other. When I first came to Buddhism, it frustrated me. These days, it's just the way it is, just like the woodland. My mind hasn't changed. I've just learned to accept the way it is. Then there are people. How unique and different we all are. Such wide-ranging opinions on the same topics. Such different approaches to the same challenges. Step off a busy street, enter the modern office, observe a while. Here you can see chaos in full flow. And of course, it's people that make it this way. The energy we apply here to bring order to that chaos is that we generate job descriptions, role descriptions, describing the way people behave in different situations. But we are still underneath infinitely complex as human beings. We don't entirely fit into these formal categories. Then these roles and categories have complex jobs to do, designed to bring order out of the chaos. But the chaos is still there. Sometimes the grey areas in these categories and roles cause our complex processes to break. When this happens, the individuals owning the roles often get into trouble, criticised, chastised, even potentially dismissed from their jobs. But I say again, I'm not against all this. These human abilities to plan, categorise and manage lead to amazing things. Our organizations are very necessary. I draw on the modern hospital, saving lives where the ultimate expression of chaos is threatening to take a hold. In a hospital, in order to deliver its task, these roles are vital. But when something goes wrong, if we're being mindful, we'll understand the influence of chaos here, perhaps be a little more compassionate and gentler in reaction to our colleagues. I perceive it's this chaos and our desire to bring order that sometimes lies at the heart of many problems. The modern world needs order and control. The city requires great energy from us to keep the chaos at bay, maintain order. The place outside of that control and order is a fearful place for many of us. Many people these days are thrown into anxiety when their mobile phone goes wrong or the shops are closed on a bank holiday. Most of us, this anxiety might be fleeting and passes quickly, but for others, it can become a real problem, leading to unskillful behavior, anger and violence, and in some people, developing deep mental health issues. Interestingly, there's a great deal of evidence to suggest the more organized and structured a country becomes, the more the general population suffers with mental health. The more developed we become, the more we drive to bring order to the chaos, the more we suffer. Very strange and very interesting. We truly are fascinating species. Okay.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I kind of want to have a moment just to allow that to land a little bit. That was such a rich sharing. And I also wanted to draw in a question that we've been asked on Facebook. So I'll read that out and give yourself space to consider a response. So one of the Facebook participants has asked, is there a difference between noticing and awe? Are they interchangeable, or do they work differently when we talk about our meditative or mindful practices?
Do you know, I had that exact question the other week on the Globe. I did. And you know, I didn't have an answer then, and I said, I'm going to have to go away and ponder that. And I still don't have an answer. I think, you know, noticing it comes up out of just our ability to see something without attaching to it. So we don't attach to the thoughts and their stories, we notice. I think awe comes out of that recognition that when we take this approach, there's something way, way bigger than us that we start to get a glimpse of and start to see. You know, it's like when you examine pure mind, when you really get into it, you start to see the scale of your mind. Well, it's way, way bigger than your head. And just to experience that's where a sensible awe comes in. Yeah. So I'm sorry I can't directly answer that, but I will continue to ponder it, maybe put it in the next book.
Yeah, that's a very rich reflection. Awe and wonder. Mm.
I'm glad we have it. You know, as a kid, I used to love magic. And part of the reason I used to love it was I like to know how it was done.
Ah.
So that I would know and the people watching wouldn't. And but now, actually, I love magic in this universe of ours. And I hope we never have all the answers. I really do. You know, I think we have quick magic and slow magic, and we're in the quick magic time at the moment. Harry Potter and things like that. We love it. But slow magic is so much more beautiful. You know, it's the reason why if you chop a branch off a tree and the leaves then die and it goes brown, science tells us it's because of the lack of moisture and nutrients. But you pump moisture and nutrients back into that branch, it won't come back to life. And so something else has gone, and it's life that has gone, and we don't still understand what that is. And I think that's a good thing. Yeah, and that's where the awe comes in, I think.
I love that. The last question I was going to ask you was about what was a recent magical thing that you had noticed. But the way you described the branch may already be answer enough. It's up to
Yeah.
you.
Well, every day I teach Tai Chi as well, and I stand in front of my students. And Tai Chi, you really notice movement, and something simple like moving my hand from here to here. Actually, science tells us the brain sends electrical stimuli to the muscles, and this contracts the muscles. For me, the experience of moving, that doesn't quite cut it. That's not how I move. My mind moves, and then the body follows. Um, that's magic. That's what I love. So really starting to notice these things, ask the question through experience, but not expect an answer. Uh, yeah.
That's wonderful. Yes, the ability to just ask good questions and allow your to allow ourselves to be in a state of not knowing yet, until our own insight arises. If it does, is such a gift, and a moment will never be boring in that when you bring that curiosity and the love of learning that you have, the love of exploration. It's very inspiring. So, Andy, thank you so much for your time and generosity and for weaving us through such beautiful aspects of Buddhism and mindfulness and presence and humanity. You've covered very rich ground for us. And hopefully, we got to take care of most of the questions. And I'd like to hand back to Felipe to end our session.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you both for what a wonderful conversation. I feel like what I'm noticing with this conversation is the magic of noticing is never ending. Like you notice one thing and then you go into the next one and then you go into the next one and you can go into this conversation forever. And I wish we had more time for this. But I really, really appreciate this conversation and what you brought into our consciousness by discussing this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So let me share my screen really quickly. I'm going to be telling you about the different things that are happening with the Charter for Compassion. I'm going to be posting the link also for you to, let me see here. I'm trying to get on the chat. There we go. So that is on the chat now. So that's a link for all our events. So tomorrow we have our EdNet Forum. Advocating for Justice Involved Youth Disrupting the School to Prison Pipeline. This is a presentation that's going to be given by Kayla Holland from Break Free Education. That is tomorrow, November 7th at 12 p.m. Pacific time. Next, every Wednesday, we have Marilyn Turkovich, our executive director, go through the Harmony of Music webinar series, where she connects and links humanity with music and all the different geographies around the world. And it's a very, very interesting and entertaining webinar for anyone who wants to join. We also have a special webinar. It is Grounding Ourselves in Nature, a Meditative Experience. This is with Dr. Jennifer Wilhoit, and this is on November 12th at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Our next EdNet Forum is Learning from Cultural Renewal on November 14th at 7:30 a.m. Pacific. Our global read for kids and family is A Grand Family for Sullivan, and this is on November 16th, Saturday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. This is for kids and adults alike. This is a great book that we'll be talking about during that session. And then we have another global read, Religion Gone Astray by Reverend Don McKenzie, part of the Interfaith Amigos, and close friend of the Charter for Compassion. And that is happening on November 20th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. As always, we have our Sangha every last Saturday of the month. In this case, is going to be on November 30th at 9 a.m. Pacific. A great time to, take a breathe, take a moment for sharing and even silence. One of the wonderful things that we get to experience, and I think that one of the things that we can see with the magic of noticing as well. We have a course beginning on December 2nd with Dr. Rick Hansen, and this is dealing with anxiety. Again, begins on December 2nd and goes for 5 weeks. And our next global read is going to be with board member Arun Waklu in his book Awakening Wholeness, and that's going to be on December 4th at 9 a.m. Pacific. And the last global read for kids and company of the year is going to be on December 7th with Magic Happens in the Unscrambled Box. And this is with authors Lisa Jennings and Gaynor Simbrinotti and Melissa Carter. So with that, my friends, thank you so much for joining us once again on this Global Read. Thank you, Orla. Thank you, Andy. This was a great conversation. Again, this will be on our YouTube channel so that you can go and explore and re-listen to some of the things that we watched and saw today. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take good care.